The first light of dawn crept over the rusted silos of Iron Harbor, painting the motorcycle lot in hues of bruised purple and gold. Jax Mercer, 38, and built like the wreckage of a storm, kicked the stand down on his battered Harley with a grunt that echoed off the chain-link fence. His boots crunched on gravel, still damp from night dew, the air thick with the scent of salt from the nearby docks and the faint metallic tang of engine oil. He hadn't slept more than a few hours. Another night haunted by ghosts he kept chained in the back of his mind. As president of the Iron Harbor Riders, Jax was the rock his club leaned on, the man who stared down rival crews and crooked cops without flinching. But this morning, something caught his eye on the leather seat of his bike, a single red rose, its petals flawless, dew-kissed, laid there like an offering from the shadows. He froze, gloved hand hovering mid-air. No note, no footprints in the dirt. The lot was empty, the other bikes silent sentinels under flickering sodium lights. Jax's jaw tightened under the salt and pepper stubble that shadowed his face. Who the hell would pull this? Prank from the prospects? Some fool testing the club's nerves? He plucked the flower, thorns pricking through his leather, and crushed it in his fist, petals scattering like blood on the ground. But as he revved the engine to life, the roar drowning out the gull's cries, a whisper of unease settled in his gut. Jax Mercer didn't do mysteries. Not since the rain-slicked road that stole his fiancée 5 years back, turning his heart to scar tissue. He rode out, the rose's perfume clinging faintly to his jacket, unaware that this was just the beginning of a debt coming due. The days blurred into a rhythm of chrome and brotherhood. Iron Harbor was a gritty port town, where the shipyards hummed with the clank of cranes unloading cargo from distant seas, and the air always carried a briny edge sharpened by diesel fumes. Jax's club garage doubled as their fortress, a sprawling warehouse of oil-stained concrete, walls lined with tool racks and faded banners from rides long past. Mornings started the same, coffee black as midnight in dented mugs, banter over torque wrenches, and the low growl of engines warming up for whatever job the day threw their way, hauling scrap, guarding shipments, or just patrolling the backroads to keep the peace. The riders were the unspoken law in a place where badges often bent. But every dawn, without fail, another rose waited on his seat. By the third day, Jack scanned the lot with narrowed eyes, the rose's stem wrapped in damp tissue as if freshly cut. He pocketed it this time, saying nothing to the crew. "What's got you twitchy, Prez?" rumbled Tank, the club's enforcer, a mountain of a man with a beard like tangled rebar, as they welded a frame in the shop. Jax shrugged, the weight of his cutter patched with the Iron Harbor skull, settling heavy on his shoulders. "Nothing. Rats in the alley, maybe." But inside, the puzzle gnawed. He'd checked the security cams himself. Grainy footage showed only wind rustling the fence at 4 a.m. No figure, no vehicle. The roses were perfect, velvet red, no wilting edges, smelling of earth and something sweeter, like a garden hidden in the industrial sprawl. Word spread quietly among the brothers. By week 1, the joke started. "Someone's sweet on the Ice King," teased Rico, the wiry mechanic with tattoos snaking up his arms like vines as he handed Jax a wrench. Laughter rippled through the garage, the clang of metal on metal punctuating their ribbing. Jax, known for his unyielding calm since the accident that left him with a jagged scar across his ribs, just grunted and kept working. Emotions were luxuries he couldn't afford. The club was his anchor, 25 men bound by oaths, forged in fire and forgotten wars. They'd pulled him from the wreckage of his old life, given him purpose when grief threatened to swallow him whole. But these flowers, they felt like cracks in the armor, reminders of vulnerabilities he'd buried deep. 3 weeks in, the roses had become a ritual Jax couldn't shake. He'd started keeping them in a mason jar on his workbench, hidden behind stacks of parts, their numbers climbing like silent accusations. 7, 10, 15. The crew noticed the shift in him. The way his gaze lingered on the lot at dusk, or how he'd ride slower through the neon-lit streets, eyes scanning alleyways. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows over the harbor's cranes, Jax sat alone on his bike, the engine ticking cool. The latest rose lay in his palm, its petals catching the dying light. Why him? Why now? The town whispered of old legends, the riders as guardians, honoring promises from battles long faded, but Jax had left his own vows in the rear view after the crash. His fiancée's laugh, her hand in his, all lost to twisted metal and pouring rain. He'd promised her forever, fate had other plans. That night, thunder rolled in from the sea, the sky splitting open with sheets of rain that hammered the warehouse roof like gunfire. Jax wiped grease from his hands. The crew dispersed to their homes or the dive bar down the block. He stepped out into the downpour, jacket zipped against the chill, and that's when he saw her. A figure in a hooded raincoat, slight and soaked, darting from the bus stop across the street. Lightning flashed, illuminating the empty lot, his bike alone under the awning. But as she approached, slipping on the slick gravel, Jax tensed. She wasn't club, too young, too fragile in the storm. She reached his Harley, hands trembling as she pulled something from her coat, a rose red as fresh blood, placing it carefully on the seat before turning to flee back into the rain. "Hey!" Jax's voice cut through the roar, boots splashing as he closed the distance. She stumbled, hood falling back to reveal a face pale and determined, dark hair plastered to her cheeks. 17, maybe, with eyes wide like a deer's in headlights. "You, stop!" She froze, rain streaming down her face, clutching an empty florist's bag. No fear in her posture, just a quiet resolve that hit Jax like a punch. "Why?" he demanded, voice low over the thunder. She swallowed, voice barely audible. "Because you don't remember, but I do." The words hung between them, heavy as the storm, as lightning cracked overhead. In that moment, the roses weren't a mystery anymore. They were a bridge to a night Jax had tried to forget, a promise pulling him back from the edge. The garage lights flickered in the distance, the club's haven waiting. But Jax felt the world tilt. This girl, this stranger with rain in her lashes, carried a piece of his past he'd thought drowned forever. As she backed away, pulsera glinting on her wrist, a thin silver chain with a faded charm, he recognized it. Hospital issue, from a night of flames and screams. His hand went to his scar, the rain mingling with a sudden heat in his chest. The rider's code was clear: honor the debt, protect the innocent. But this was personal, a thread unraveling years of stone. He let her go into the night, the rose wilting on his seat, knowing dawn would bring more than flowers. It would bring truth, and with it, the kind of reckoning that could shatter a man or remake him whole. The rain pounded relentlessly, turning the gravel lot into a churning sea of mud and shadows. Jax stood there, water sluicing off his broad shoulders, his eyes locked on the girl as she retreated into the storm. Her words echoed in his skull like distant thunder. "You don't remember, but I do." The silver bracelet on her wrist caught another flash of lightning, its faded charm twisting like a ghost in the downpour. He knew that band, issued in the chaos of emergency rooms, the kind that marked survivors of nights no one walked away from unchanged. His own scars burned under his wet shirt, a map of fire and regret from that cursed highway years ago. Jax Mercer wasn't a man who chased phantoms, but this one had just slipped through his fingers, leaving only the scent of wet earth and roses in her wake. He turned back to his Harley, the rose now sodden and bruised on the seat, petals bleeding color into the leather. With a curse swallowed by the gale, he mounted up, the engine snarling to life beneath him. The ride home was a blur of blurred taillights and slick asphalt, the harbor's fog lights smearing like tears across the windshield of passing trucks. Iron Harbor's streets wound tight at night, neon signs from dive bars flickering warnings to stay clear. Jax's mind raced ahead of the bike, piecing fragments. The accident, the flames, the child's cries cutting through the smoke. He'd pulled her out, yeah, tiny thing, coughing and wide-eyed, then her mother, limp and unresponsive. The medics had swarmed, sirens wailing into the dawn, but Jax had faded out on a stretcher, burns licking his side, before names were exchanged. Woke up in a hospital bed alone, discharged himself against orders, and rode away from it all. Buried the memory under layers of club runs and cold steel. Now this girl, Nenah, her name flickered unbidden from some half-forgotten report, had dragged it back, petal by petal. Dawn broke grey and unforgiving over the club's warehouse, the rain reduced to a persistent drizzle that dripped from the eaves like hesitant confessions. Jax arrived early, his boots leaving muddy prints as he crossed the lot. The brothers trickled in soon after, Tank hauling a crate of parts, Rico nursing a thermos of coffee that steamed in the chill air. The garage hummed to life, air compressors hissing, sparks flying from welders as they prepped bikes for a scrap haul down the coast. Jax busied himself at his workbench, the mason jar of roses, now a stark sentinel amid the clutter of bolts and rags. 16 stems, each a silent question. He hadn't told them yet about the girl. Words felt too raw, too close to the fractures he'd sealed shut. Tank lumbered over, wiping sweat from his brow with a forearm the size of a log. "You look like hell warmed over, Prez. That storm keep you up?" His voice was gravel, laced with the concern only brothers shared. No pity, just the straight talk that bound them. Jax nodded curtly, torque wrench in hand, tightening a chain link that didn't need it. "Something like that." The big man eyed the jar, his bushy brows knitting. "Those damn flowers again. Thought you said it was rats." Laughter bubbled from Rico nearby, but Jack shot him a look that silenced it quick. "It's not a joke, Rico. Someone's been leaving 'em every morning." The mechanic leaned against a toolbox, arms crossed over his inked chest. "Well, spill it. Ghost? Secret admirer? Or you finally piss off the wrong florist?" Before Jax could answer, the side door creaked open, letting in a gust of harbour mist. It was Nenah, the club's unofficial medic, a sharp-eyed nurse from the free clinic down the block, patched into their world after patching up too many riders after brawls and wrecks. She carried a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her scrubs still bearing the faint scent of antiseptic. "Heard you had company last night," she said, voice steady but eyes probing. Word travelled fast in Iron Harbour. Someone must have spotted the girl from the bar window. Jax set the wrench down, the metal clinking like a confession. "Kid, drop in the roses, says I saved her once." The garage fell quiet, the only sound the distant clang of a buoy in the bay. Tank's face softened, a rare crack in his enforcer's mask. "From that crash? The one you never talk about?" Jax nodded, the weight of it settling like lead. "Her ma didn't make it. I pulled 'em both out, but... yeah." Nenah stepped closer, her gaze flicking to the jar. "And now she's thanking you. After all this time?" Jax pulled out the latest rose, its stem still damp. More than that. She knew details, the rain, the fire, wore a bracelet from the hospital that night. The brothers exchanged glances, the air thick with unspoken oaths. The Iron Harbour Riders weren't just a club, they were a covenant, forged from veterans' scars and the kind of loyalty that outlasted blood. They'd stood by Jax through his darkest ride after the fiancé's death turned him hollow. Now, this debt from the past rippled through them like a stone in still water. Rico broke the silence first. "We ride for family, Perez, chosen or not. If she's reaching out, we find her, make it right." The morning stretched into a haze of work and whispers. Jax rode out alone after lunch, the coastal road curving under tires that hummed against wet pavement. The sea crashed against jagged rocks below, salt spray stinging his face, mirroring the turmoil inside. He stopped at the old bridge where the accident happened, a rusted span now flanked by wild roses climbing the guardrails, their thorns a testament to survival. Kneeling there, wind whipping his kuta, Jax traced the scar on his ribs, the skin puckered like forgotten braille. He'd made a promise that night, unspoken, protect the innocent, carry the weight, but grief had twisted it into isolation. Nenah's face haunted him now, resolute in the rain, carrying a grief heavier than her years. What else did she hold? Why the silence, until now? Back at the warehouse by dusk, the crew gathered around a scarred oak table in the back room, beers sweating in the humid air. Flickering fluorescent lights cast long shadows, the walls echoing with tales of old runs. Jax laid it out. The crash details pieced from memory, the girl's vague description. She's hiding something, gratitude maybe, but there's pain there. Tank nodded, fist thumping the table softly. We watch the lot. Cams ain't catching her? We will. Lena added, kids like that don't forget. If it's you she found, it's 'cause she looked hard. The decision hung unspoken. The club would stand with him, unravel this thread of the past. As night fell, stars pricking the velvet sky over the harbor, Jax stared at the jar. 17 roses now, each a petal of reckoning. Tomorrow, he'd seek her out, not as the stone-cold Prez, but as the man who'd once braved flames for a stranger. The road ahead twisted with promise, pulling him toward redemption he hadn't earned, but couldn't refuse. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The warehouse lights buzzed like distant hornets as Jax pushed through the side door, the night's chill clinging to his jacket like an uninvited shadow. The scarred oak table still bore the faint rings from their beers, the air heavy with the residue of cigarette smoke and unspoken resolve. He'd barely slept, the stars mocking him through the cracks in his trailer ceiling, visions of flames and a child's gasp, replaying in endless loops. 17 roses now mocked him from the jar, their petals curling slightly in the humid confines of the garage. Dawn was hours away, but waiting felt like surrender. Jax grabbed his keys, the metal cold against his palm, and fired up the Harley with a throttle that shattered the quiet. The engine's roar was a lifeline, pulling him into the pre-dawn streets where fog rolled off the harbor like breath from a sleeping giant. Iron Harbor stirred reluctantly under the sodium glow of street lamps, delivery trucks rumbling toward the docks with loads of fish crates that reeked of brine and scales. Jax wove through the empty avenues, his mind a storm of fragments, the girl's resolute eyes in the rain, the silver bracelet's glint, the way her voice cracked on those 4 words. He'd saved lives before, pulled brothers from wrecks, stood vigil in hospital corridors. But this felt different, like a debt he'd forgotten to pay interest on. The coastal road curved toward the town's edge, where clappered shops huddled against the wind, their awnings flapping like weary flags. He didn't know her name yet, but the florist's bag she'd clutched gave him a thread. Caldwell's Blooms, the faded sign read in his memory, a hole in the wall on Elm Street, where the air always smelled of damp soil and cut stems. He killed the engine a block away, boots silent on the cracked sidewalk as he approached on foot. The shop was dark, shutters drawn, but a faint light leaked from the back alley, where trash bins overflowed with wilted leaves and ribbon scraps. Jax leaned against a lamppost, the iron cool through his kuta, watching the shadows. Minutes stretched into an eternity, the only sound the lap of waves against pilings and the occasional creak of a dumpster lid in the breeze. Then, movement, a figure emerging from the rear door, slight and bundled in an oversized hoodie, locking up with hands that moved too precisely for exhaustion. She paused, sensing him perhaps, her head tilting like a bird's before she bolted down the alley. "Nenah!" Jax called, the name surfacing from that hazy report in his mind, low and steady to cut through the fog. She froze mid-stride, shoulders tensing, then turned slowly, her face half hidden under the hood. Up close in the dim light she looked even younger, 17 going on weary, with faint shadows under eyes that held too much for her years. "How'd you—" she started, voice a whisper edged with wariness, clutching a backpack like a shield. Jack stepped forward, hands open at his sides, the club's skull patch catching the light. "The bag last night, this place, and yeah, I remember a name from the medics, Nenah Caldwell." Her breath hitched. A small sound lost in the night, and she nodded once, sharp. "You weren't supposed to find me. Not like this." They stood there, the alley a narrow confessional between brick walls, slick with mist. Jax's scar itched under his shirt, a phantom burn urging him on. "The roses, 3 weeks of 'em, why not just say it?" Nenah's gaze dropped to her scuffed sneakers, tracing a crack in the pavement. "I tried. After the accident, I mean. Drew pictures for the police, described your tattoos, the way you smelled like smoke and leather. But you were gone by morning. No name, no trace. Mom." She didn't make it, and I bounced between aunts, schools, places that blurred together. Her words tumbled out, halting at first, then gaining momentum like a bike downshifted on a hill. The rain from the night before had left puddles that reflected fractured streetlights, mirroring the breaks in her story. Jax listened, the weight of it settling in his chest like engine sludge. He'd ridden away from that hospital bed, burns bandaged but soul raw, chasing the horizon to outrun the guilt. "I pulled you out first," he said quietly, voice rough as gravel. "You were coughing, eyes so big. Your ma. She was trapped bad. I got her free, but the fire." He trailed off, the memory's heat rising unbidden. Nenah nodded, pulling back her sleeve to reveal the bracelet, its charm etched with a faded heart. This was hers. Hospital gave it to me when they said she was gone. I kept looking for you. Years. Saw a picture in an old paper. Club ride. Your face in the back. Knew it was you. The roses, they're from her garden. She loved them. Red ones always. I work here to buy 'em fresh. It's like leaving a piece of her where you are. The confession hung between them, fragile as the fog swirling at their feet. Jax felt the club's code stir in his veins, honor the fallen, shield the living, but this was deeper, a thread tying his isolation to her quiet vigil. Why now, after all this time? Nenah's eyes met his, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "School's ending soon. I'm leaving for the city nursing program. Wanted to say thank you before I go, and to tell you her name, Elena Caldwell." She whispered it to me in the car, before the smoke. A tear tracked down her cheek, unnoticed in the mist. Jax swallowed hard, the stone in his throat cracking just a fraction. He'd carried faceless ghosts. Now one had a name, a face, a daughter's devotion. Footsteps echoed from the street. Rico, scouting as promised, his silhouette broad against the lamplight. "Prez? Everything square?" Jax raised a hand, signaling all clear, but the moment shifted. Nenah tensed, glancing between them. "Your club. They know?" Jax nodded. "They're family, chosen kind. If you're leaving a debt settled, they stand with it." She hesitated, then reached into her backpack, pulling out a folded paper, edges worn soft. "This, her certificate. I carry it. Proof, I guess." She pressed it into his hand, fingers brushing his calluses. Warm. Alive. The paper crinkled under his grip, ink faded but words clear. Elena Caldwell, departed in flames and rain. As Rico approached, Nenah backed away, hood up again. "Tell them. The roses were for both of you, for saving what was left." She vanished into the fog before Jax could respond, leaving the alley emptier than before. He unfolded the paper under the lampost's glow, the stark lines blurring slightly. Elena's name, the date, a night he'd marked as his own breaking point. Rico clapped a hand on his shoulder, voice low. "She the one?" Jax pocketed the certificate, the weight of it anchoring him. "Yeah, and it's bigger than gratitude." They mounted up, engines harmonizing in the dawn's first light, heading back to the warehouse where the brothers waited. The jar would hold 18 roses by morning, but now they carried more than petals, a legacy of quiet sacrifice, binding the club in tears yet to fall. The road twisted ahead, not toward escape, but toward the family forged in fire's aftermath. The warehouse doors groaned open under the weight of the morning sun, spilling Jax and Rico into the garage like survivors from a midnight raid. The air inside was already thick with the acrid bite of welding torches and the oily hum of compressors, but the usual banter fell silent as the brothers caught sight of them. Tank straightened from under a lifted chopper, his massive frame casting a shadow across the concrete floor, while Nenah paused mid-stitch on a torn leather saddle, her needle hovering like a held breath. Jax's boots echoed heavier than usual as he crossed to the scarred oak table, the folded certificate burning a hole in his pocket. 18 roses waited in the jar on his workbench, their crimson heads bowed as if in mourning, the latest one still dewy from the alley's mist. He spread the paper flat under the harsh fluorescence, the ink stark against the yellowed stock. Elena's name. The date of that rain-lashed night, cause listed in clinical detachment, multiple injuries sustained in vehicular fire. No drama, no fire's roar captured in words, just the cold finality that had haunted Nenah's eyes. The crew gathered close, cooters brushing like whispers, the scent of coffee and machine grease mingling with the faint perfume of petals. Tank's calloused finger traced the lines, his beard twitching as he read, This is the Ma from your ghost run?" Jax nodded, voice low and edged with gravel. "Yeah, Nenah carried it all these years. Roses for her garden, for what I pulled from the wreck, gratitude wrapped in grief." Rico leaned in, his inked arms folding tight across his chest, the vines on his skin seeming to twist in the light. "Kid's been hunting you since she could walk straight. That's no small debt, Prez." The garage, usually a symphony of clanks and curses, went still, the only rhythm the distant pulse of waves against the harbor pilings. Lena reached for the paper, her nurse's eyes scanning it with professional detachment that cracked at the edges. She was what, 28? Young? And Nenah? 17 now. Means she's been alone with this since she was 6. Her voice softened, carrying the weight of too many bedside vigils. Jax felt it then, the scar across his ribs pulling taut, a reminder of the flames he'd charged into without a second thought. He'd ridden away to forget, but Nenah's quiet vigil had stitched the wound open, thread by crimson thread. Word rippled through the club like oil through an engine, texts pinging silent phones, prospects slipping in from the lot with wide eyes. By noon, the back room swelled with the full 25, chairs scraping as they crammed around the table, the air growing dense with the musk of leather and unspoken bonds. Jax stood at the head, the certificate pinned under a beer cap like evidence in a trial. He recounted it all. The alley confession, the bracelet's glint, the way Nenah's voice had trembled naming her mother. She works that flower shop after school, buys 'em fresh on her own dime, crosses town on the bus before dawn, leaves 'em like prayers. Never asked for nothing back, just remembered for us both. His words hung, raw and unpolished. The man who'd stared down bar fights and badge-wearing crooks, now stripped to the bone. Tank broke first, his enforcer's bulk shifting as he cleared his throat, eyes glistening under the low beams. "We all got ghosts riding pillion. Mine from the sandpits overseas. Promised a brother I'd watch his kid if he didn't come home. Never did. But this, a girl carrying that weight alone." He trailed off, fist clenching on the table, the wood creaking under the pressure. Rico nodded, wiping his face with a rag that came away damp. Iron Harbor's full of broken roads, but we fix what we can. That's the oath. Murmurs rose, stories spilling like confessions. One brother of a lost patrol in the desert, another of a fiancé's empty chair at Thanksgiving. The riders weren't born to one another, but forged in the crucible of shared scars, their loyalty a chain stronger than any lock. Lena folded the certificate gently, sliding it back to Jax. She's leaving for nursing school. Wants to heal what she can, like you did that night. The room absorbed it, the emotional undercurrent swelling until it crested. A prospect in the corner, fresh-faced with a prospect patch still stiff, let out a choked sound, shoulders shaking. Then Tank, unbreakable Tank, bowed his head, a tear carving a path through the grime on his cheek. It spread like wildfire. Rico's laugh turning to a sob, veterans clasping arms in silent solidarity. Jax stood amid it, the stone in his chest fracturing as the club's collective grief poured out, not for the roses, but for the innocence preserved. The promise kept across years of silence. The air hummed with it, a catharsis long overdue, binding them tighter in the face of a world that chewed up the vulnerable. As the sun slanted low through the grimy windows, casting golden bars across the tear-streaked faces, Jax pocketed the paper again. We don't let this end in an alley. Nenah's family now, chosen like us. We'll see her off right. Make sure the road ahead's clear. Nods rippled through the group, resolve hardening like cooling steel. The garage stirred back to life outside, engines coughing awake, but inside, the moment lingered. A reckoning that washed away years of dust. Jack stepped out into the fading light, the harbor's salt breeze cooling the heat in his veins. 18 roses, and counting, but now they bloomed with purpose. The club had wept, not from weakness, but from the raw honor of debts repaid in quiet, enduring ways. Tomorrow they'd ride for her, honoring Elena's memory and Nenah's courage. The Iron Harbor riders unbreakable in the face of forgotten fires. If this chapter moved you, smash that like button. It helps these stories reach more hearts in need of redemption. The salt-laced wind off the harbor whipped through the open warehouse doors, carrying the faint toll of a buoy bell like a mournful dirge. Jax Mercer leaned against the scarred oak table, the certificate from Elena Caldwell now tucked into his inner pocket, its edges pressing against his chest like a heartbeat from the past. The brothers had scattered after the tears, some to their bikes, others to quiet corners of the garage where wrenches became distractions from the raw ache, but the air still hummed with their shared catharsis. The concrete floor bearing fresh boot prints like footprints in emotional sand. Jax's eyes drifted to the mason jar on his workbench, 18 roses standing sentinel, their petals of vivid accusation against the grey dawn threatening to break. He couldn't sit idle. The club's resolve had ignited something in him, a spark long smothered under layers of scar tissue. With the sun cresting the silos, painting the lot in reluctant gold, Jax fired up his Harley, the engine's rumble vibrating through his bones like a vow renewed. The ride to Elm Street was deliberate, the coastal road unfurling under tires that gripped the damp asphalt. Sea spray misting his visor. Iron Harbor's morning stirred, fishermen hauling nets at the docks, their calls mingling with the cry of gulls wheeling overhead, the air sharp with iodine and fresh-caught cod. Caldwell's Blooms came into view, a modest storefront wedged between a pawnshop and a laundromat, its window boxes overflowing with late-season blooms that defied the industrial grit. Nenah was there, visible through the glass as she arranged stems in buckets, her movements precise despite the shadows under her eyes. School backpack slung over one chair, florist's apron tied loose around her waist. She looked smaller in the daylight. A girl piecing together a life from clipped thorns and watered soil. Jax killed the engine across the street, the sudden silence, amplifying the tick of cooling metal. He crossed the pavement slowly, boots scuffing against the curb, pausing at the door where a brass bell jingled softly as he pushed inside. The shop enveloped him in warmth. The earthy tang of potting soil, the sweet undercurrent of roses, and the faint hum of a cooler in the back. Nenah looked up, her hands freezing mid-snip on a pair of shears, eyes widening in a mix of recognition and guarded hope. "Mr. Mercer," she said, voice steady but soft, setting the tool down with deliberate care. No fear, just the quiet poise of someone who'd faced down flames at 6. Jax removed his helmet, tucking it under one arm, the club's patch on his kuta catching the light, filtering through lace curtains. "Nenah, last night. The brothers know now, about Elena, about you." He pulled the certificate from his pocket, unfolding it on the wooden counter scarred from years of bundles and payments. Her gaze dropped to it, fingers tracing the faded ink, a flicker of pain crossing her face like a cloud over the sun. "I didn't mean to drag your world into mine. The roses were just mine to give." The shop's clock ticked onward, marking seconds heavy with unsaid words. Jax leaned on the counter, the wood cool under his palms, inhaling the floral symphony that masked deeper sorrows. "You didn't drag, you bridged. The clubs wept for it, for her, for what you carried alone. We're not leaving you to ride solo to that city program, not after this." Nenah's breath caught, her eyes lifting to meet his, the silver bracelet glinting as she wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "I can't ask that. You've already given enough. Mom always said good people exist, even in the dark. You proved it once, that's all I needed." But Jax shook his head, the motion pulling at his scar, a reminder of debts that circled back. "It's not asking, it's the code. Chosen family doesn't watch from the sidelines." He glanced out the window where the harbor's cranes loomed like iron guardians, then back to her. "Tell me what's next. The bus rides, the shifts here, it's holding you up, but barely. We can help. Rides to school, protection on the road out." Nenah hesitated, her resolve cracking just enough to reveal the girl beneath, the one who'd pieced together survival from wilted petals and half-remembered voices. "There's trouble, not big, but enough. The shop owner's behind on rent. Some collector from the docks, shady type, shakes down small places like this. Says if we don't pay double by week's end, it's boarded up. Mum's garden dream. Gone." The words landed like gravel in an engine, stirring Jax's blood. Iron Harbor's underbelly wasn't new to him. Crooked enforcers tied to the port's smuggling rings, squeezing the honest for their cut while badgers looked the other way. He'd stared down worse with the riders, their runs often doubling as quiet justice against the corrupt. "Name him," Jax said, voice dropping to that low timbre that commanded without raising. Nenah bit her lip, glancing at the door as if expecting shadows. "Vince Russo. Runs with a crew out of the old cannery. Tattoos like yours, but meaner. Threatened last week. Said he'd repossess the stock himself." Her hands twisted the apron's tie, the fabric bunching under her grip. Jax's jaw set, the pieces slotting into place. Nenah's dawn vigils, the risks she took crossing town alone in the pre-light hours. This wasn't just gratitude anymore, it was a call to the promise he'd made in flames, to shield the fragile from the storm. He nodded once, firm. "You focus on those books. The future. We'll handle Russo. The club rides for what's right, not just blood." Relief washed over her features, tentative but real. Like sunlight breaking through fog, she reached under the counter, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in tissue, a 19th rose, its stem fresh cut, thorns wrapped in care. "For the jar, and for Eleanor. Tell them thank you." He took it, the petals soft against his calluses, a symbol of bridges built from loss. As he stepped back into the street, the bell jingling farewell, Jax felt the weight shift, not heavier but purposeful. Mounting his bike, the engine's growl harmonized with the rising tide, he headed back to the warehouse, the rose secured in his jacket. The brothers would gear up, their loyalty a thunder rolling in. Russo's threat loomed like a storm cloud over the bay, but the Iron Harbor riders didn't bend to shadows. They'd carved justice from the corruption, honoring Elena's memory and Nenah's quiet strength, one twist of the throttle at a time. The road ahead gleamed with moral fire, pulling Jax toward a redemption that bound them all in unbreakable chain. The warehouse thrummed with the low pulse of anticipation as Jax rolled in, the Harley's growl fading into the echo of idling engines. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, gilding the rows of bikes like polished relics, their chrome catching flecks of dust motes dancing in the beams. The air hung heavy with the scent of fresh weld and cooling exhaust, but beneath it lingered the faint floral trace from the rose tucked in Jax's jacket, a 19th bloom, fragile yet defiant. He dismounted with a creak of leather, boots grinding against the oil-slicked concrete, and the brothers turned as one, their faces etched with the morning's resolve. Tank loomed by the tool racks, arms crossed over his barrel chest, while Rico wiped grease from his hands on a rag, eyes sharp as switchblades. Lena hovered near the back, her medic's bag at her feet, a quiet anchor in the brewing storm. Jax laid the rose on the scarred oak table, its petals unfurling like a banner of intent. "Russo," he said, voice cutting through the hum like a revved throttle. "Shaking down the flower shop. Nenah's boss behind on rent, and this dock rat's double in the squeeze. Threatens to gut the place if they don't fold by week's end." The name dropped like a spark on dry tinder, igniting murmurs that rippled through the garage. Vince Russo, a shadow from Iron Harbor's underbelly, tied to the cannery's smuggling veins. His crew, a pack of opportunists, preying on the town's frayed edges. The riders knew his type. Hollow men with ink that mimicked loyalty but reeked of betrayal, enforcing debts for bosses who hid in high-rises across the bay. Tank's fist thudded softly on the table, the wood vibrating under the impact. "Cannery scum. Been sniffing around the docks too close to our runs. Time we remind 'em the harbor's got its own law." His eyes, usually stormy, burned with the fire of old battles. Veterans' grit forged in sands far from this port. Rico nodded, uncoiling like a spring, his tattoos shifting as he flexed. "We ride quiet." No blaze of glory, just enough to make him back off, keep Nenah's spot safe. The club wasn't about vengeance. Their justice was measured, poetic, a stand for the overlooked, echoing the promises that bound them. Jax felt it stir in his veins, the same pull that had drawn him into flames years ago, now channeled through the Brotherhood's unyielding code. By midday, the plan took shape in the back room, maps unrolled across the table like veins of the town. The old cannery squatted on the harbor's eastern spit, a skeletal relic of rusted girders and boarded windows, where fog clung like a shroud, and the water lapped black against pilings. Jax traced the route with a calloused finger, the paper crinkling under his touch. "We split. Half watch the shop from afar, ensure no surprises. Rest of us meet Russo at his usual haunt, the Anchor's End bar, after dark. Talk first. If he pushes, we show teeth." Nods circled the table, the air thickening with the musk of leather and determination. Prospects geared up with fresh chains and subtle reinforcements, while Lena prepped a kit for any fallout, her steady hands a testament to nights spent mending what the world broke. As dusk bled purple across the sky, the convoy assembled in the lot, 20 bikes forming a silent phalanx under the flickering lot lights. Engines whispered to life, a chorus of restrained thunder that vibrated through Jax's chest, syncing with the scar's faint pull. He led the ride out, the coastal road winding like a serpent under tires that hummed against cooling pavement. The harbour lights twinkled in the distance, buoys swaying like hesitant lanterns, the salt breeze carrying whispers of brine and distant storms. Iron Harbour at night was a labyrinth of shadows, neon from bars bleeding into alleys, the occasional horn from freighters slicing the fog. Jax's mind drifted to Nenah's face in the shop, resolute yet weary. her bracelet a silver thread linking past to present. This wasn't just for the roses anymore. It was for Elena's garden, for the girl who'd bloomed from ashes, carrying gratitude like a shield against the encroaching dark. The anchor's end materialized from the mist. A squat dive with fogged windows and a sign creaking on rusted hinges, the scent of stale beer and fried fish wafting from the door. Jax signaled the pull-in, bikes parking in a loose arc that blocked the lot without crowding, their headlights cutting swaths through the gloom. Inside, the bar was a haze of smoke and low laughter, pool cues cracking against balls like distant gunfire. Russo held court at the back booth, a wiry man with a shaved head and tattoos snaking up his neck, skulls and anchors, cheap echoes of the rider's own ink. Two goons flanked him, their postures tense as coiled ropes, nursing drinks that sweated rings on scarred wood. Jax entered alone first, the door swinging with a groan, his kuta settling heavy on his shoulders. The room quieted fractionally, eyes flicking his way before returning to their games. He approached the booth, boots thudding softly on the sticky floor, the air thick with the tang of spilled whiskey. "Russo," he said, voice level, pulling out a chair without invitation. The man looked up, sneer curling his lip, recognition dawning like a bad omen. "Mercer, Iron Harbor's watchdog. What, club slumming it tonight?" "Ah." His laugh was bark without bite, but his eyes darted to the lot where shadows of bikes loomed. "Word's out you're leaning on Caldwell's blooms," Jax replied, leaning forward, elbows on the table's edge. "Small shop hard worker, not your play." Russo's face hardened, fingers drumming a rhythm on his glass. "Rent's rent. Boss says double or they're out. Kid's boss owes big. Ain't my call." The lie hung thin, laced with the corruption that festered in Iron Harbor's ports, where honest toil got crushed under boot heels. Jax's gaze didn't waver, the club's code a steady flame in his chest. "Walk it back, or we make it our business. The girl's got enough shadows without yours." Tension coiled in the booth, the goons shifting, but Jax held the line, his presence a wall of quiet authority. Outside, the brothers waited, engines idling like patient beasts, the sea's murmur underscoring the standoff. Russo's sneer faltered, calculating the odds, the rider's reputation for standing firm against the tide. "Fine," he muttered finally, waving a hand. "Tell the florist they've got till month's end. No extras." It wasn't surrender, but a retreat, bought with the weight of unspoken threats and the moral steel that backed them. Jax rose, the chair scraping like a punctuation, and stepped into the night, the cool mist kissing his face. The convoy reformed, throttles easing into a rumble that faded toward the warehouse, victory tasting of salt and resolve. Back under the garage lights, the crew debriefed in hushed tones, the rose jar now claiming its new addition amid nods of approval. Jax felt the fracture in his armor mend slightly, the debt to Nenah and Eleanor edging toward balance. But as stars wheeled overhead, a faint unease lingered. Russo's back-down was temporary, the harbor's corruption a deeper current. The road to full redemption twisted on, pulling the riders toward one final stand, where loyalty would forge their legacy in unyielding light. The warehouse lights hummed like a fading heartbeat as the convoy rolled back in under the cloak of night, the engine's rumble dissolving into the harbor's ceaseless whisper. Jax dismounted first, the Harley's stand kicking down with a metallic sigh, his boots sinking into the gravel still warm from the day's sun. The air carried the sharp tang of exhaust mingled with sea salt, a reminder that Iron Harbor never truly slept, its undercurrents always churning beneath the surface. The brothers followed suit, kutas rustling as they gathered in a loose circle under the lot's sodium glow, faces shadowed, but eyes alight with the quiet triumph of the anchor's end standoff. Tank wiped sweat from his brow, his massive frame casting long silhouettes across the chain-link fence, while Rico pocketed his keys with a nod that spoke volumes. The 19th rose, now safely in the jar inside, stood as a fragile emblem of their stand, not just for Nenah, but for the fragile blooms of hope in a town that crushed them underfoot. But Jax's unease hadn't lifted. It coiled tighter in his gut, like a chain slipping on a greasy sprocket. Russo's retreat had been too easy, his sneer too calculated, hinting at strings pulled by hands far dirtier than a dockside thug's. Back in the garage, the scarred oak table became command central again, maps spread wide under the fluorescence that buzzed like impatient hornets. Lena joined them, her medic's bag slung over one shoulder, the faint scent of antiseptic cutting through the oil and leather. "He'll bounce back," she said, voice steady as she poured coffee into dented mugs, steam rising like ghosts. "Types like Russo don't fold. They fetch bigger dogs." Jax traced the cannery's outline on the map, the paper crinkling under his calloused finger. "Boss is Harlan Tate, old money from the shipping lanes. Rudders through the ports. Russo's just the muscle. If we hit the shop again, it's war on his turf." The night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky over the silos as plans solidified into action. The rider's code demanded precision. No reckless charges, but a measured ride to expose the rot, shielding the innocent without spilling blood. Jax felt the pull of it all, the scar across his ribs aching in sympathy with the ghosts of that rainy highway, Elena's name now a talisman in his pocket. He'd saved Nenah once from flames. Now the club would save her future from the shadows that preyed on dreams like hers. Dawn crept in grey and insistent, painting the lot in muted silvers, and by first light the full 25 assembled. Engines harmonized in a low thunder, the convoy snaking out toward the eastern spit, tires humming over asphalt, slick with morning dew. The coastal road twisted like a vein, flanked by dunes where wild roses clung to the wind, their thorns a silent salute to endurance. The cannery loomed from the fog like a forgotten beast, its rusted girders skeletal against the rising sun, waves crashing against blackened pilings with a rhythm that echoed heartbeats. Jax signaled the split. Half the crew, led by Tank, circled wide to watch the florists from afar, ensuring no surprises slithered toward Elm Street. The rest, with Jax at the helm, approached the main gate, bikes idling in a phalanx that blocked the access road without aggression. The air reeked of brine and decay, fish guts from old processing lines mingling with the oily sheen on the water. Guards, Russo's crew, burly shadows in ill-fitting jackets, emerged from a side door, hands hovering near waistbands. But the riders held formation, helmets off, faces set in unyielding calm. "Tate," Jax called, voice carrying clear over the surf, "we know your game. The shop's off limits. Back your dog off, or the harbour hears how you squeeze the small for your big lies." From the depths of the structure, figures emerged. Russo first, flanked by 4 more, but behind them, Harlan Tate himself, silver-haired and sharp-suited, a shark in pinstripes, his eyes cold as the tide. He stepped forward, the gravel crunching under polished shoes, a smirk playing on lips that had bought silence from too many. "Mercer, your little vigilante parade won't touch my operations. That flower's a flea on the elephant. Pay up or pave over." The threat hung, laced with the corruption that festered in Iron Harbor. Bribes to badges, threats veiled as business, all to keep the smuggling veins pumping unchecked. Jax dismounted slowly, the club's skull patch gleaming in the light, his presence a wall of moral steel. "It's not about the rent. It's about the girl, 17, working honest, carrying a loss you can't touch. We got proof, ledgers from the docks, whispers from your own rats. Push this, and it all spills to the light." Tension crackled like static before a storm, the goons shifting, but Tate's calculation flickered. The rider's reputation wasn't bluster. It was forged in stands like this. honoring oaths that outlasted greed. From the tree line, sirens wailed, distant but approaching, not club-called, but tipped by Lena's clinic contacts, clean badges drawn by the mapped evidence of Tate's web. Panic rippled through the cannery crew, Russo's face paling as he backed toward the shadows. Tate's smirk cracked, hands raising in feigned innocence. "Misunderstanding. We'll review the accounts." It was retreat, wrapped in bluster, the deeper current exposed, forcing his hand without a fist thrown. Jax held the gaze, the sea's roar underscoring the victory. Justice not in violence, but in the unyielding light of truth. The convoy reformed under the climbing sun, engines roaring triumph as they wheeled back toward the heart of Iron Harbor. At Caldwell's Blooms, Nenah waited on the stoop, backpack ready for her final school day, the shop's sign swinging gently in the breeze. Tank's group pulled up first, and as Jax arrived, she rose, eyes wide with unspoken questions. He handed her the 20th rose. Fresh from her own counter, a loop closed. "It's done, Tate's backing off, the club's watching. Rides to the city, check-ins, whatever you need." "You're not riding alone." Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but release, the bracelet on her wrist catching the light like a promise fulfilled. The brothers encircled loosely, a chosen guard of leather and loyalty, sharing nods and quiet words that wove her into their fold. As the sun crested high, casting golden paths over the harbor, Jax felt the fracture in his soul mend, not whole, but scarred strong. Elena's certificate rested light in his pocket now, a legacy honored through Nenah's bloom. The riders rode out together, a thunder of brotherhood escorting her bus to the edge of town, the road ahead clear of shadows. Iron Harbor's grit endured, but so did its quiet heroes, the ones who kept promises across flames and years, forging family from the ashes. In the jar back at the warehouse, the roses stood eternal, petals of redemption whispering that some debts, once paid, bound souls forever. Thank you for riding this journey with us. If stories of honor and chosen family move you, hit subscribe. We'll keep the tales coming, one promise at a time.